The wind was dry and heavy with tension in downtown Los Angeles as protesters surged toward the Civic Integration Center just after midday. Word had spread rapidly through encrypted messaging apps and online forums that a tactical arm of immigration enforcement, coined unofficially by onlookers as the Deportation Troops, had been stationed nearby. Clad in military-grade gear and operating under federal authority, these agents represented the sharpened edge of a new and aggressive policy on undocumented immigration enforcement. Before we start, hit the like and subscribe buttons for more exclusive news. The crowd wasn't what city officials expected. While demonstrations around immigrant rights had become common, this gathering wasn't led by chants, coordinated speakers, or nonviolent resistance. It was a collision of desperation, anger, and resentment that had been brewing beneath the surface for years. Undocumented migrants, many who had lived in Los Angeles for decades, marched not just in protest, but with the searing fury of people facing erasure. That afternoon, the line between demonstration and confrontation dissolved in seconds. A group estimated at over 700 had coalesced into a single front outside the center, demanding access to detained family members and transparency on deportation actions. The banners they carried fluttered like battle flags. Many faces were masked not just by COVID-era coverings, but by makeshift scarves, hoodies, and bandanas, protection against both identity exposure and the escalating volatility. Chants gave way to shouts, then to thrown bottles and makeshift projectiles. The troops responded with a precision that was neither delayed nor hesitant. They emerged in staggered formation from the flanks of the Civic Center, their black uniforms and unmarked armored trucks lending them the appearance of a paramilitary force rather than civil agents. In coordinated movements, they deployed crowd control tactics developed more for war zones than civic unrest. Sound cannons, rubber bullets, flashbangs, and tear gas that turned the city's heart into a choking, chaotic fog. Some of the protesters, many of whom had never faced live suppression, panicked. Others, gripped by defiance, charged forward. The scene descended into a blur of combat. Hands clutched metal barricades and turned them into makeshift battering rams. Individuals hurled bricks, glass bottles, and even flaming rags as Molotovs. Smoke curled into the late afternoon sun, casting shadows against the once pristine Civic Center walls now graffitied with expletives and resistance slogans. The term illegals had always carried weight. Used politically to divide, legally to prosecute, and socially to dehumanize. But on that day, it was wielded like a blade, slicing through the atmosphere of the city and marking a rupture between residents and institutions. These weren't faceless names in databases. They were workers, parents, students, and friends. Yet in the eyes of the agents they faced, they had become targets. The brutality of the response wasn't merely about crowd control, it was a message, a statement of absolute authority. Troops beat back protesters with batons and shields, targeting those who filmed or shouted the loudest. Detainees were snatched in swift motions, pulled into vans with hands zip-tied and faces pressed to steel floors. The cameras that survived the chaos captured bodies crumpling under rubber bullets, bleeding from gashes and burns. Screams echoed through alleys as tear gas drifted into apartment complexes, affecting residents with no part in the clash. Every second of resistance met with escalation. Behind this eruption lay months, years of policy tightening. The so-called deportation troops were the product of new federal directives focused not just on removing recent border crossers, but aggressively targeting long-term, undocumented residents through raids, detentions, and expedited removals. Legal observers had warned for months that such a crackdown, combined with militarized enforcement, was a recipe for unrest. Yet the response continued under the justification of restoring order and upholding sovereignty. Los Angeles, with its deep-rooted immigrant population, had long been considered a sanctuary. But sanctuary became meaningless when the enforcers arrived with tanks instead of summons, with stun grenades instead of subpoenas. For those watching from rooftops, the lines of troop formations against their neighbors felt like a siege. The center of the city was no longer a civic space, it had become a battleground. By evening, the streets were soaked not only in spilled water bottles and shattered glass, but in blood, both symbolic and literal. Video clips flooded the internet within hours. A young girl, age 7, clutching her father's hand was caught in the dispersal and collapsed from a gas canister. An elderly man, likely in his 70s, was seen kneeling, arms raised, as a baton cracked over his shoulder. Mothers screamed the names of children they could no longer see. The violence of the encounter wasn't simply about physical injury. It was a psychic blow to a city that had long prided itself on multiculturalism and inclusion. Watching black trucks roll down boulevards like instruments of war invoked scenes not from Los Angeles but from totalitarian states, where dissent is silenced with boots and bullets. Those who fought back didn't do so blindly. They acted with the knowledge that silence was complicity. Their aggression stemmed from the mounting dread that their lives, built carefully over years of work and sacrifice, could be undone in a moment by a knock at the door, a misplaced document, or a name on a list. Some had already lost friends and family to deportations executed without warning or explanation. The center symbolized that dread, and attacking it became, in their minds, an act of survival. But that survival instinct was met with a machine designed not to negotiate, but to eliminate resistance. The brutality of the troops, later described in some circles as a militarized purge, wasn't a misfire or breakdown of command. It was the plan. To quell the possibility of further demonstrations, the force needed to be unrelenting, publicly visible, and psychologically scarring. Footage captured shows men in tactical gear, kicking fallen protesters as others screamed for medics. Reports emerged of detainees being held in makeshift cages erected in underground parking garages. Lawyers attempting to intervene were physically barred. Civil rights organizations were locked out. Every possible avenue of due process was bulldozed by overwhelming state presence. In the days leading up to the assault, whispers had circulated through migrant advocacy groups about increased surveillance and drone flights over known gathering spots. Several organizers had gone missing. The event at the Civic Center wasn't spontaneous. It was the combustion of rising temperature, and both sides knew it was coming. Yet no one, not even the most cynical among observers, had predicted this scale of force. The psychological implications stretched further than the broken bodies on the pavement. For the immigrant community, a new lesson was etched in blood. Their presence, regardless of how long they had lived here, how many taxes they paid, or how many children they raised, could be criminalized without recourse. Their identities were made illegitimate not by law, but by force. They had been rendered invaders in homes they had built themselves. The incident also tore open deep rifts within the broader city population. While some citizens stood frozen behind their windows, others joined the march. And others yet cheered the crackdown from their television screens. The narrative of restoring order found fertile ground among those who viewed immigration not as a humanitarian matter, but as a threat to national identity and economic stability. The presence of the deportation troops did not begin that day, but it was on that day that their existence was defined, not just as enforcers, but as an occupying power. They answered to no local government. They coordinated only with federal agencies. Their gear was military. Their posture was domination. And their actions that day in Los Angeles would ripple through every community whose members feared the knock of their boots. The moment the first projectile was thrown, the event stopped being about protest. It became a test of sovereignty. Who owns the streets of Los Angeles? Who has the right to assemble? Who deserves to call the city home? In the eyes of the state, those questions were answered with force. But for the thousands watching, online, in person, or from behind closed blinds, the answers grew murkier and darker. It wasn't just about the undocumented. It was about precedent. The willingness to unleash military-grade suppression against civilians set a tone that went far beyond immigration. What would stop the same troops from being deployed against labor strikes, environmental protesters, or even journalists who report the wrong angle? The chilling effect was immediate. In the hours following the crackdown, several community meetings were canceled. Activist pages went dark. Some families, even those with legal status, withdrew their children from schools. Los Angeles, long celebrated as a city of refuge, became a cautionary tale in real time. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, could you leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on the deportation troops' brutal response? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.